UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres plans to appoint a former Senegalese minister to lead UN efforts to broker peace in Libya. The 15-member UN Security Council needs to agree by consensus to the appointment of Abdoulaye Bathily as the UN Special Envoy for Libya. If there are no objections, then Bathily's appointment will be approved. Bathily would replace Jan Kubis, who stepped down in December. Guterres had informally proposed two other people to fill the role, but the Security Council could not agree. Would the appointment of a UN envoy change the situation in Libya, which according to some analysts might be on the brink of another civil war? This is All 24 News special coverage. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm your host, Karim Zachary. And before we bring in our guest, here's what's on tap today. Libya has had little peace since the 2011 NATO-backed uprising that ousted Muammar Gaddafi, splitting the nation in 2014 between rival Eastern and Western factions and dragging in regional powers. Libyan oil output, a prize for the warring groups, has repeatedly been shut off. Libya's worst fighting for 2 years suddenly hit the capital, Tripoli. Recently, that is, and the clashes erupted and ended suddenly. Rosemary De Claro told the Security Council she was worried about Libya's security situation, where infighting between armed groups loyal to the country's rival administrations killed more than 30 people over the weekend. There is potential for new violence in Libya, the United Nations official said Tuesday, as the country faces delays in moving toward elections. All right, let's bring in our guest now. Joining us live via phone is Lucinda Lavelle, British political activist in Libya from Tripoli, and from London is Mohammed Tantoush, Libyan researcher. Gentlemen, madam, good to have you with us. A very warm welcome indeed. Let me start with you, Mr. Mohammed Tantoush. How do you find the plans to appoint a former Senegalese minister to lead UN efforts to broker peace in Libya? Do you think he'll be able to make any progress in comparison with his predecessor?
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. First of all, I would like to thank you for having me today, and good luck in I knew that this TV channel is quite new, so good luck in your new trip.
Thank you.
Well, let's be honest and say that since 2011, Libya has had more than 6 special envoys to Libya representing the United Nations. But I think the progress that they made was, I can say, very little, and it wasn't stable at all. And because they're representing the also the Security Council, which is very divided right now. And now I think everyone can agree that the world have the biggest disorder since, like, I think the Cold War or something like that, because and so many countries are involved in the situation in Libya. And there is no agreement about what is the future vision for Libya. So we cannot guarantee that Mr. Abdullah Bathily will success if he was appointed officially to be the special envoy to Libya. But it's also depends on how the international community, especially the members of the Security Council, will work together to find a solution in Libya and to work as a successful and mediator to the conflict in Libya. So there's no guarantees for successful, but also we cannot say from his resume that he will succeed or he will not, but because he wasn't in cases like Libya, which is very complicated, and you can only compare the Libyan case to other cases such as Yemen Iraq or Syria, which has like so much involvement of many different countries with different interests and with very detailed local conflicts as well. And these conflicts are not driven by one factor only. It's driven by multiple factors. So that's why it's very complicated.
Very nice indeed. Thank you for all these clarifications. And what about you, Mrs. Lucinda Lavelle? How do you find the plans to appoint a former Senegalese to lead the mission in Libya? Do you think that he'll be successful? And how do you find our distinguished guest comments? Do you agree?
Good morning. And to be honest, we have to look at what the real agenda is for the UN. To talk about the UN being successful, we're starting from this, that the UN actually wants free democracy in Libya. And the UN has constantly refused to denounce any actors that have created war or, closed the oil fields, destroyed the economy of the country, committed war crimes. They still meet with Aguila Saleh, they still meet with al-Masri, they still meet with Haftar. Do we assume that their agenda is to lead us into a free democracy? The previous Stephanie Williams, UN envoy Stephanie Williams, she's been thanked by Antonio Guterres for her contribution to the roadmap towards democracy, and yet she failed to produce elections in December. She failed to sustain peace in Tripoli and other parts of the country. She's failed to control Haftar's both violent attacks and his economic destruction of the conflict. What success are we praising there exactly? What has she succeeded in doing? Now, whether the Senegalese candidate could have an influence, I don't know. It depends if we're trusting that the UN have an agenda to bring us true democracy. And I query that. I mean, I feel that the UN is almost a fifth columnist in Libya, actually. With
and Mrs. Lucinda, I would like to take you a little back to recent days where dangerous clashes actually happened in Tripoli between armed groups. How do you find these clashes, and how dangerous is it for Libya, according to you, Mrs. Lucinda?
Well, the clashes are catastrophic. They bring the city to a standstill. 32 people died in the last clash. Infrastructure is destroyed. Hospitals were targeted. But there's no condemnation. I looked at the UN, knowing that we're going to discuss it today, I actually looked at the UN, which I stopped now because I no longer feel that the UN's intervention is relevant to real Libyan progress. But I did actually look today to see what the UN had said about this conflict, and they did not mention who are the instigators of this violence. Totally. That Bashaga and Haftar, with the backing of the UAE, with the backing of Egypt, are behind these attacks. How can we have a sensible comment from the UN when they're refusing to identify the perpetrators of the violence?
Understood.
We should all be really good and be nice to each other. I mean, we're not in kindergarten and they know of the very powerful forces that are behind these puppets in Libya, like Haftar and Bashaga, who are just in the tail of much more powerful nations that totally do not want to see democracy next door to them.
I'd like to bring in Mr. Mohammed Tantoush on this. How or to what extent can both parties have credibility issues with the Libyan people, given that their mandates have expired? Speaking about the prime ministers, of course.
Well, everyone is talking about the legitimacy in Libya since a long time. So what I can say is that, while legal legitimacy is a point of disagreement, and because we didn't have a constitutional court for a while, and they just came back to work like last month, there was no one to make a decision about this legal legitimacy disagreement, but I can say 100% that all of them lack the political legitimacy and lack the people support legitimacy. And of course, all of them, they are not representing the vision of the Libyan people who would like to have stability and free elections and one elected government. But also what I can say that there's no solution there because the United Nations have facilitated the number of dialogues in 2015, 2014, and then after the war in 2019 they have facilitated another mediations and another dialogue. So these parties are representing the conflict parties, and the conflict parties are actually doesn't represent the people of Libya.
And speaking of the conflict, Mr. Mohammed Tantoush, how likely, because a lot of analysts raise the issue of Libya being on the brink of another civil war, how likely is that, and how can 10 or 11 years of negotiations, mediation and ceasefires all fail to bring peace? Is there a way out?
Well, to be honest, no one can see a way out right now because now it's out even of the local conflict parties, because now there's also an international conflict parties who are supporting each party of the conflict, and sometimes they are even try to push their own interests above even the local parties' interests. It's not only now about the people interests; it's also about there are things that goes above the local conflict parties' interest. So, and regarding the civil war, that's the thing. Now, the main thing that everyone didn't realize that what happened in 2011 was actually civil war. Okay, it was a revolution against Muammar Gaddafi, but it's also the participants of these actions actions were Libyans. It's either those who supported Gaddafi and those who were against him, they were Libyan. So that's why what should have been happened since the fall of Gaddafi in August 2011, it should have like a real reconciliation and negotiation and reconciliation dialogue between all the Libyans, and to see how they think about their future, what they would like to have in their future, and to see to also practice the transitional justice and to bring justice to everyone before starting actually the political process with elections. The elections brought another polarization within the Libyan community, and from that everything started again. Polarization and also a competition on resources and money.
Understood,
and power.
Mohammed Tantoush. Yes, I would like to bring in Mrs. Lucinda Lavelle. And Mrs. Lucinda, to what extent could this situation be boiled down? I mean, some analysts say that these are the two prime ministers who are supposed to appoint, or who are appointed and supposedly to deliver elections, which they couldn't bring about. Why stalling, though?
Well, I didn't quite catch the end of that question, but if you're asking me why we are...
we have two prime ministers who were normally appointed to deliver elections, which they couldn't bring about. Why do you think is this solely?
The same reason that I've said before, to be frank. For a start, you have to look historically at where we're at in the election process. We had 42 years under Gaddafi, where no parties were allowed to form. Everything was dictated from his government. There was no freedom to form parties, to write manifestos, to enter into a democratic process in any way. And then magically in 2011, we're supposed to know how to run a democracy and the process to reach a democracy. You need institutions to maintain a democracy. You need a media that works and is free and open. You need you need civil rights. You need people being able to express their opinions without being picked off the streets and murdered and left on the road.
But Mrs. Lucinda, who do you think, according to your perspective, is against the elections? What do the people of Libya really want? And would the UN efforts to broker peace in Libya succeed?
The normal citizens that aren't under the pay or the influence of external forces. They want freedom, they want democracy, they want peace, they want to live. I mean, the Libyan people are not particularly party politics orientated. They just want to live their lives, and they want to be able to have some self-determination and not have everything forced on them from other nations. But there are nations, which is the elephant in the room that everyone keeps ignoring, like Egypt and France, that are purposefully and systematically destroying the democratic process. And until we actually look that in the eye and start talking about that and start to dismantle that influence, then whatever the Libyan people want is going to be irrelevant. Whatever the Libyan people do is going to be irrelevant. There are much bigger forces out there that are desperately trying to, oppress the democratic process. Yeah.
And Mr. Mohammed Tantoush, do you agree with our guest on her comments just now? And just to bring to, let's say, the surface the latest information, on Thursday, the Libyan Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibeh met in Istanbul with his Turkish Foreign Minister counterpart Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, Defense Minister Hulusi Akar, and Chief of Intelligence Hakan Fidan, in order to discuss the unification of national and international efforts to support Libya's elections. What outcome can we have from such efforts, Mr. Mohammed?
Well, Turkey is involved in Libya since like years, but their involvement become stronger since 2019 because they supported the government of national accord against Haftar. So they put so much resources and so much efforts on that. Because as everyone knows that Haftar that war was supported by actually other international countries like Egypt, France, and the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, so on. And Turkey, with the international policy or the foreign policy of Turkey that expanded out of the Turkish borders, they tried to have power and have a strong position in other countries, and what they called the strategic national security borders, which is outside of their own areas, such as in Syria, Iraq, and also Libya. So they tried to have a good, strong position also in the international community. While now, but also since the end of the war, they started to try a different approach, which is trying to make some kind of dialogue or agreement with the other countries, like Egypt, for example, to find solution in Libya. I don't know how much this will bring solution to Libya, but as I see that actually France and Egypt have had a different approach to support to create another government, which is now Bashar is leading, and also try to what I can call to make a new reality by bringing a new government. While the Turkish side tried to be neutral, they really didn't say nothing against this government, but also they didn't support it, but they didn't make anything against it. But I think they have a framework, which is the safety of Tripoli. Don't touch the agreement between Turkey and Libya. Don't touch the Turkish military bases in Al-Witya and their existence in Maitiga. So they have some kind of borders and framework. But other than that, they will be very flexible.
Very nice. And to a different angle, Mrs. Lucinda Lavelle, would either side be prepared to accept a government led by someone who has no ties to the government of national unity or the Tobruk parliament as a solution? Does that person even really exist? And is it what actually the Libyan people want?
I think that's a possible solution to this problem, because Unfortunately, the actors that aren't tied to either side don't have an opportunity to sort of rise up and have their voices heard. They aren't engaged with by the UN. UN has meetings, as I said before, with, mainly Ghila, Salah and Haftar, who are actually war criminals, and yet they don't really engage with the actors that aren't linked to these sides and that could possibly bring an alternative voice into the equation. They don't tend to be taken seriously or really supported in any real meaningful way. There's lip service paid about giving all Libyans a voice, but that is lip service. It's not really put into action. And I think that this has to be the way forward. I mean, we are at a stalemate. We are at a point where what can actually, if Haftar and Ghila Salah were out of the equation completely, which as war criminals they should be, but no one's strong enough to actually make that happen or to do that, and then we could have a chance for a free election. But maybe these people who are there because they're concerned about Libya, genuinely love Libya, genuinely want to improve the conditions for Libyans, would have an opportunity to rise up. But while they are there completely polarizing the arguments just between Darbaiba and Bashaga, and that's the only voices that are heard, then there's no opportunity for these voices to come out. But I agree with the previous speaker that this is, this is probably the way forward.
And Mr. Mohammed Tantoush, how can really democracy take hold when you have many armed groups in control of large parts of the country? What's the suggested solution here?
Well, let's explain the situation in this way. The armed groups, the majority of the land is under Khalifa Haftar's control. And so the armed groups, the majority of armed groups in the east and the south are actually controlled by one man, which is Khalifa Haftar, but also but the armed groups, even if the armed groups in the west, they are not they are not on the same page, but also I don't think that they have that kind of behavior that will work against conducting any elections. So this is why when someone talk about the reason why when they are putting the blame on the GNU government, the government of national unity, that they didn't implement the elections last December, and they say that they are not controlling the whole of Libya. Well, they are forgetting one important point, that no one can control the whole of Libya, because in order to control it, it's not control it, you will have some kind of agreement with Haftar, who is controlling the majority of the Libyan lands. So that's why. So that's why when someone when Bashar talks that he can implement the elections, the hidden thing that he's not saying, he's saying that because I have an agreement with Khalifa Haftar, so we can work together to implement the elections. And what make Khalifa Haftar agree on Bashar's government, then that's another thing that means that actually Bashar is guaranteeing that Haftar will have his own interests within the government of Bashar. That's the one thing.
Understood.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Lucinda, based on just the previous speaker's comments, does Libya really have a chance to stand as one country in the future, one single country, given the fact that the moment, at the moment, it is governed by two separate entities, as one in the east and one in the west? How likely is a different Sudan case scenario is going to happen in Libya?
Well, I would hope for a united Libya. I would be devastated if the federalists win and it's divided. I would be really sad to see that happen. And I'm sure many Libyans agree with me on that. But we have to be, again, look at, we talk about Haftar having large parts of the country. Geographically, yes, he has large parts of the country. Population-wise, he doesn't have large parts of the country. Population-wise, Tripoli, Misrata, all the major cities on the west side are not for Haftar generally. He has, elderly tribesmen from the south who support him. Are these the people that are going to take Libya into the 21st century successfully. We have to look at that, but the leaders and the powerful people in the west of the country aren't supporting Haftar. So we have to look at whether that, it's true that he actually has all this mass of support, or has more than half of the country. Mm-hmm. How much support does he even have in Benghazi? It's a very oppressive city. There are people murdered literally every day of the week. And any voices that are opposing him, I know this from personal experience, there's families are threatened or murdered, or we have members of parliament. Senegalese was actually taken from a home and executed somewhere, never got a body back. So really, we talk about having support. How much of that is oppression and is paying homage to him because of fear, and how much is genuinely supporting somebody who really wants to be, to replace Gaddafi, someone who wants to be another dictator, someone who dresses himself up as a field marshal and calls himself an army. He's a militia. He's a militia leader, and he keeps his support through bullying and oppression and using absolute thugs to bully the population.
Understood.
So I don't even know if the support of Haftar is genuine. How can you tell it's genuine if you've got thugs bullying you in your home, saying that if you don't shut up criticizing Haftar, we will murder you.
Quite understood, Mrs. Lucinda Lavelle. And Mr. Mohammed Tantoush, is there a long-term fix scheme to this dangerous situation? How do we bring about a solution to this and get a unified government? I mean, is an agreement on how to hold elections as a lasting solution to Libya's political disputes looks further away than ever to this point?
Well, let me first agree with every word Lucinda said. I mean, of course, I wasn't talking about support. I was talking about the reality of controlling. So, and yes, actually, the conflict parties are not looking for democratic solutions because there is a lot of options. Well, we have an elected constitutional committee. We have reduced a constitutional draft, which is ready to have a referendum on. We have another solution, which is to make a parliamentary elections, and after that we can make a constitutional phase, and that we can implement presidential elections based on. But actually, no one is looking for a democratic solution. Everyone is trying to use election to actually they want the election that put them in the power, that put them in control. So, and that's the real answer for why the election haven't been made in last December, because actually Bashar and Haftar knew 100% that they will not win the elections, and actually Saif al-Islam and Abdel Hamid Beiba were more able to win the elections more than anyone else in the country. So that's the main reason. So we are not talking about a democratic dilemma here. We were talking about people who control weapon and all at the same time political decision, and they are also conflict parties with international support. They are working against a solution for the interest of the people. That's it.
And Mrs. Lucinda Lavelle, with Libya's political tangle, which seems so far from resolution, is there even a little likelihood that oil exports, for example, will stay untouched for very long? And if not, how is this going to exacerbate the already difficult energy crisis in the world, especially with the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, we definitely have the war in Ukraine is definitely having an impact on life in Libya. Obviously, inflation and the cost of living here is making life very hard for the Libyan people. And when things get tough, and when shopping gets tough, and when food gets tough, that's when the Libyan people take to the streets generally. So they're getting restless now for a solution, for the country to move forward, and for definite future plans to be laid out. And the war in Ukraine is having an impact on us without a doubt. I mean, we've got a triumvirate of problems in this country. and that's definitely what keeps us a bit. But is there? I mean, we have to hope, don't we? I mean, we've come a long way since 2011. We went forwards and then we went backwards, and hopefully we're somewhere in between those two extremes at the moment. And I think that the fact that these incursions on Tripoli aren't successful is a very big indicator that the people will not stand for another dictatorship coming in. That they are determined, even if it means losing their lives and losing their homes and being impoverished by, they will not accept another dictator to rule over them. And I just want to go back to something, is it Mr. Hans said? He said a constitution. We need a constitution before forward. And the fact that we've not managed to put a constitution together.
Well, the voice has become unclear all of a sudden, Mrs. Lucinda. We're going to have to leave the conversation right there because we run out of time. Thank you so much for your thorough analysis, Lucinda Lavelle and Tantoush Mohammed. Thank you so much for your thorough analysis, and thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on All 24 News. That's the end. Bye for now.